Okay, as everybody finishes logging in, if you log in and your microphone's on, I may just mute you with the controls I have open right now. And then Chris Larvick's going to be moderating, so if you have chat questions that come up during the session, he'll be monitoring the chat so we can keep track of that for the most part. I'll be going through the training session, and then we can address the questions and the chats at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. The PCs had a checking Kaizen that was ongoing, and we recently did a PDCA of our checking Kaizen SWIS, which allowed us to make some improvements. The one that we're going to be reviewing in today's session is using the Keysheets as part of our checking process. So the SWIS itself, if you're on the portal underneath the standard procedures, you're going to scroll down to engineering, and it's the checking guidelines SWIS. So when you open that SWIS document, it's the normal SWIS, and the instructions are just to follow these guidelines. The actual guidelines are attached in this Word document. So when you open the document, it has the checking Kaizen checklist. So basically, these are the steps that we go through. A lot of these, the PCs will be following. So as we're working on setting up the project from day 1, day 2, etc., these we've been using. The new parts of this that we'll be reviewing at today's training session are going to be setting up a master set of Keysheets, how to set that up into a Bluebeam session, and then using those. So this SWIS is available on that portion. So I'm going to move this out of the way. We're not going to be staring at this document as part of the presentation. I'm just going to be going over the actual steps. So on the meeting agenda that I sent, the first part is starts for the PEs right around day 2 at step 6 is creating the master review set of the Keysheet. So with Bluebeam sessions, the option that we've decided to use is that we're going to create a set of Keysheets using the normal operator SWIS for creating Keysheets. So when you go into your jobs folder and you go into drafting and takeoff, then you'll create your Keysheets in the normal manner, and then you'll publish those into this spot. So I have a copy of that made here. I'm just going to copy and paste this in. For your normal process, this is going to have, let me do a little bit here and mute. Okay. So the key here is that this is just going to be in the drafting takeoff folder. This is the master document that's used to create our studio session. So once you have this master document created, we're going to follow this specific naming convention. We're going to put the job number first, and then the underscore with the job name, and then with the unit Keysheets at the end of the name. This follows the logic of how job names are established in the portal. So when we go to review these later to find them, we'll find them by the job number. The process that we're creating is going to have just a single studio session in order to access any of the job Keysheets. So when you have your Bluebeam session open, go ahead and open up Studio and get connected. Then in the add, you can go to Join, and you'll see on our SWIS that we have the studio ID number is this specific number. So when you hit Join on that, when you add that in, it will show up with our project Keysheets is that session folder. Our intention is we'll put all Keysheets for all jobs in this one studio session. And then we'll discuss how we're actually going to deal with the files as we progress through this training session. So all of our Keysheets will be stored here. Now, this does not have that one that I just created in it yet, so we're going to go through the steps of how to add it into this session. So this is under step 8 if you're following along on the SWIS itself. So here under Documents, you're just going to select this Add File button. This is going to let you navigate to the folder location. So in our case, this is just inside of here and here. We'll go to Drafting, Takeoff, and inside the Drafting Takeoff folder where we just created this from that first step, we'll select this file and then just hit Open. So now this document is going to be available in the studio session. So this is the studio session version of that. If you were to log in now, you'll see that I just loaded that up. So all of us could actually go in and look at this document right away. So now that this is loaded up, the studio session is set up for use. My next step, I'm actually going to close out of studio. I don't need to be in studio right this moment because what I want to do is I actually want to take care of my original copy. In the past, when we had a copy of the Keysheets inside of our folder structure, we would go in and open that set of Keysheets and mark it up, etc. But since we're in the studio session, we don't want to be marking on this one. This is basically our hard copy, our archive copy at this point. So I'm going to open this copy from the server. So this, again, is not the studio session. This is just the hard copy. And I want to put a stamp on here so that it's indicating that this is really just going to be a read-only and you should use the studio session. So part of this Kaizen event, we created a stamp. So in our tool chest, down under the WW Tools Fab Takeoff, this bottom one here, when you hover over it, you see it's called Keysheet Read Only. So you're going to select that stamp and then just paste it right there on the first page of your, again, this is just the archive. This is the hard copy on the server. Once you put that stamp on there, you can save this document. So now, if someone happens to open this from the server, they'll see this note that our intention is to use the studio session in order to work with the Keysheets for your job. And we have the actual studio session ID number right on there as well. So you'll be able to find that session even just by looking at the stamp. So we try to tie all these things together so that they made sense. So we'll use this stamp. Now, there are instructions if you don't have this stamp loaded. The SWIS has instructions and a link to how you can update your tool chest to actually get this stamp into your tool chest. It's already on the server, so if you follow the SWIS, you'll be able to add this stamp into your specific tool chest. So if you haven't done that yet, you won't see it in your tool chest, but after you do follow that part of the SWIS, you'll be able to see that stamp. Once you've got this, hold on, I got to mute somebody here. check your microphones. I'm seeing somebody's, just hearing some feedback here. Somebody's got their microphone on. Not seeing it here though. Okay, sorry about that. So once you've got this completed, then close this out and then go back to your folder structure. So inside of the folder, we want to set this key sheet up as read-only so that even if you tried to open it, it's going to give you that little prompt that it's a read-only. So you just right-click on the file, go into Properties, and in Attributes, select Read-Only, and hit Apply and OK. So now if I go to open this copy, it's going to have that note on there so that I can see that this is not my key sheet that I'm going to be using for the session. So now I'm going to close out of that. So next up, we're going to be going over using the key sheets for checking. So the PCs will be using the key sheets to check their units by week. So now in my studio session, I'll just open this one. So this is the studio session. You notice the stamp is not on the studio session version. We only put that on the server copy. So after we check the units, we'll be doing a very specific process for checking them for each week. So I'm scrolling down much further in the process. So if you're following along on the SWIS, this is in the added section. It's called the PC Checking Kaizen Key Sheet by Week process and tracking units by week. We also have the session ID listed there so that you should be able to see it and add in if you lose track of that. So once the PC does the check on the unit, then we're going to do a search for it. So in our example here, I'm going to search for this unit 428 as an example. So when I search for that, it's going to bring up all of the instances where that unit occurs. Now in this project, it has a special criteria that we may need to follow. Normally, you'll see your unit on the elevation like this. But since we have a lot of these projects with these strip windows, they have multiple quantities. So this one's an example, there's 4. We actually need to include the floor plans so that we can see each occurrence of this. We'll be able to see it on the floor plans as well. So that's one of the guidelines. If you have a project that has multipliers on the elevation, you also need to include the floor plans so that we can check each instance of the unit to make sure that it's accounted for. So here, one of the steps that we'll be doing is after we find the unit, we'll select it in each of the floor plans, verify that dimensionally that's correct. We'll correspond that with the elevations as well. We'll check this on our shop drawings to make sure that there hasn't been something that's changed. Once we verified that this is correct for that spot, we're going to select these check boxes. So after we've done those specific steps, in this case, we're going to check all of these off the floor plans. And then here, that's floor plan. Once we get to here and we check it on the elevation, we'll do the same thing where we'll check that this unit compared to our shop drawings is correct for this spot. But we also, and then we'll select the check mark right here to verify, yes, I've confirmed that that's correct. But we also have this unit occurring on another elevation. So I'll do the same thing. I'll compare to make sure that this unit doesn't have anything here that would make it different. So for example, if this was a different glass size or glass type, or this had changed from 5'0" 1/2 on one elevation and it's 5'0" 1/4 on the other elevation, then I may need to do something and change this unit number. In this case, once I verified that they are the same and they need to be the same, I'll do that check mark. Once I've done that, we're going to use this tool. It's called Check Options. We'll go down and do this highlight checked. So on the highlight checked, it now indicates if I go back to any of these specific locations, it's highlighted each instance of that unit. So that's verified that I've confirmed that each of those is correct in those spots. So that gives us that high level of quality control that we verified each instance of each unit, even if there's multiple counts occurring. So let me scroll down to the next part of the process is primarily for the PCs. Once we've checked all of the units on the week, we have another process that we will go through to verify that all the units that need to occur on this week 2, for example, are actually selected and checked. If we find any that, for example, let's say we didn't have this 426 in the checking folder, then we'll just work with the operators. We'll get that unit printed and we'll check it before we tell you that that week 2 is ready for update and release. So that's the PCs portion of that. We went over that in more detail with them. So we're going to skip past that part for the fine detail of that. So one of the things that we see is that it's common for us to have duplicate units. So we might have this unit 427 that occurs on week 2, but it also occurs on week 3, and maybe it occurs on week 4, etc. So we've developed a process on how to work with duplicate units. We're in the middle of doing our weekly checking. We really only have the time to check the units that are on that specific week. So we don't want to look at the unit 427 for week 3, week 4, and week 5 yet, because we're not there. And as we've seen with past projects, is that sometimes there are changes that occur after we've processed this week 2 that may affect another unit. So perhaps they added a door into one of these bays on week 4, and that happened with the normal draft and request when you were processing week 3. Well, if you had marked up all these on week 4 when you were doing week 2, then that wouldn't be true anymore. So you really want to just do this on that week-to-week cycle. So the duplicate unit process is, if you were printing out this unit for week 3, you would just print out all of the units that had been previously done and checked for the week 2 and put them in a duplicate units folder. And then the PC will just do a quick study on that. We'll actually open up the released unit, make sure that everything matches with the glass and the mark numbers of all the parts, and we'll verify then that each location on the week 3 is correct for that unit. So for example, we had a condition where we had a unit that was from a previous week, but on the current week that we were checking the duplicate unit, this bay had changed from 5'0" to 5'0" 1/8. So we realistically had to rebuild that unit and make it 1/8 of an inch bigger. So when that was the case, by checking these in each instance, even though it's a duplicate unit, we're looking at where it actually belongs on the building specifically for that week. We're able to identify that that unit wasn't really a 427, even though it had previously been named a 427. And so we changed it. We marked up the key sheet to call this a 427A, for example, when this was 5'0" 1/8. So that's part of our process that we would, if we find something during that duplicate unit check, we would work with the PEs and actually get that corrected for the specific week where that mismatch actually occurred. So here's just a little tip. If, let's say, you were checking all of these and you saw that this unit 428 wasn't really supposed to be highlighted here, but it might be kind of hard to figure out, well, when did that actually happen? You can actually just go in and right-click on that and delete that note. So if you find that you've actually highlighted one through this process mistakenly, you can remove that highlight by actually going to the exact location, doing that right click on it, and then selecting that delete from there. So here's the key. This is down in section 4, right after the duplicate units process. The benefits of using these key sheets in this way, it's going to allow the PCs and the PEs to have a clear visual control of every unit of every week and each instance of that unit. Any questions or discrepancies will be identified during the checking the process, and we won't have opportunities for a unit to be mislabeled and sent out to the shop in the field and it's the wrong unit. So once we're done with the job and we've released all of the weeks, our next step is going to be archiving the file out of here. So for example, when we go into the studio session, Project Keysheets, we're going to expect that any of our current projects will be listed here. And since this is a new process, we only have just some random examples that we were using for testing. So once we start producing this, let's say if we have 8 jobs going at any one time, we'll expect to see that there's 8 documents in here. Once we're done releasing the week, let's say week 8 of 8 is completed, we don't want to let these key sheets just linger in here. So we've created a process to take the key sheets off of this folder and save a copy of them back into the job folder so we can always go back and open them, look at any of our markups, etc. So we're going to review that process next. The key part of this is that the PC and the PE will do this step together in order to verify that we're not accidentally deleting off of the studio session a current job. So if I want to archive this one, but I was actually over here and I started to delete this, by doing this process together, we'll have that visual control of, wait a minute, that's the wrong one. So we'll actually be able to look at this together. So the steps themselves, once you've released your final week, then the next step is to get the PC and the PE together and archive this current studio set. So in the studio session, find your job, and then you can go over here to the X button, which is delete, or you can right click on it and then select delete. It's going to come up with this prompt and it's going to ask you, are you sure you want to permanently delete this? And at this point you actually do say yes, because the very next prompt is it's going to ask you if you want to save a local copy. And this is definitely a yes. This is the key part of the process. We want to be able to reference these later to see all of the marks that we made, any of the notes about we decided to change this unit 426 to a 426A because the size changed. Whatever the case is, we often reference our key sheets after the release has been sent out to the shop. So yes, we want to save a local copy. So we'll hit yes. And then you're going to navigate to your folder. So this is my sample job folder. So under drafting, takeoff, I'm going to save it in the same folder. And it's going to have a similar name to the file that's in there. But since this is the marked up set, we're going to add, oops, I've got my cap locks on. We're going to add released to the file name and then hit save. And you'll see that immediately deleted it off of the studio session. So that is no longer available in Studio, but at the same time, it's not cluttering the studio session with jobs that have been completely released either. So now, when I close out of this, my next step is, well, it looks like I have 2 copies in here now. Well, my original copy is really just a similar version of this, except it doesn't have the markups on it. So since I have this in the folder now, and it's got the released in the name, that's the copy that has all of my marks on it. That's really the only one that I need. So we're actually going to go into this version and delete it. So you can right click and delete. It's going to ask, do you want to delete that? And you say, yes, I want to delete it. Again, this is part of the process that the PCs and the PEs do together. Okay, so that's that part of the process. Again, the main benefit of this is that all of the units will have a visual control that we can use together to make sure that every unit is checked for every week. You verified each instance to make sure that there's not something weird that happened that would cause it to need to be a different unit name based on its location or a change to the shop drawings, etc. So the rest of the SWIS is primarily for the PCs, and we've reviewed that together. But I would recommend that when you get a chance, just read through the thing, and if there's any areas that you're not sure about, what does that look like for us, or how's that part of that work, then we can have follow-up discussions on that. Okay. So that's the primary discussion about how we're going to be using the unit key sheets for checking. So at this time, I'll open it. If anybody has specific things they want to check in on or touch bases on. Okay. And the question is,
so we cannot use our filters for a full week anymore. We will have to hand pick any person's food of this unit.
I don't know what that means, so we'll have to have that discussion with the operators. So we can have that follow-up discussion about how to use filters to select which units you're printing for checking. I'm not sure how that would work for them. And then looks like Ryan had asked the question, answered the question about if you don't have this if you don't have the stamp in there, we actually have the steps inside of the inside of here. There's a link to the Bluebeam session. So if you click on that, it actually opens the Bluebeam training session off of the portal, off of the training page. And I think it's on page 23. It shows you how to import the tools. So you can import the tools that's already on the server. So if you follow these steps, it will show up so that you'll have the stamp inside of your Bluebeam session. So, you know, as I pointed out, the stamp is in here. Chris is asking, what about when there's updates to the key sheets? Do you replace it or just mark it up? So good question, Chris. We had addressed that probably in the SWIS, and I probably just didn't speak specifically about it. But let me open up that file again. So let's say you're let's say you go to this specific unit here, and this actually changed, and it shouldn't be a unit 488 anymore. And this changed. This actually needs to be a 488A because it bolts into the adjacent unit, whatever the case is. So we'll just keep using this initial set of key sheets, And then when you go to renumber this, you would renumber it with your 488A or whatever the program assigns to it, however you decide to make that actual unit number. So publish your new unit name here, but leave the old name accessible, because when we do a search for this, if you, for example, if you did that, well, I don't have so many copies. So let's say if you just published it right over the top of the original, if I have multiples of this, I won't be able to see what this used to be. But if you have it here and you've made that to where you have to renumber it, just make it so that your original is readable still. Might be a good idea just to redline through this so that you can see that this is the updated unit number. Now for checking purposes, this unit 488A won't show up in the same way that the typical does. This is just going to show up as a text box. So this doesn't give me the opportunity to do this highlight checked on it. So let's say we check this as an updated mark number, and we agree that the unit 488 that we checked is actually correct. Then what we'll want to do, since we can't use that highlight checked, is we'll line through it, and then we'll just change our line color to the yellow. So the visual will look similar. We'll be able to tell that I verified that this updated unit mark number marked 488A is actually correct. So this is a good practice. Now, one of the things that on our previous incarnations of this, the operators might have been doing something like this to kind of keep track of which units they've created. And not everyone was doing that. And after our discussion, we don't think it's strictly necessary to do that. So if you're using the unit tracker to actually build your units out, and we're doing our check by week, and we've done our check on our unit 476, for example, and we verified our locations, and we select that one, we verified that location, then we use our highlight checked. We'll be able to see, we've got that visual control that they're done and verified in that specific location. So we don't think it's strictly necessary for the operators to actually go in and line through these as they're building them. This new part of the process allows us to see every unit has been verified by week. Okay, so good questions there. Any other questions? You can pop them up on the chat box. Let me scroll through here. So Chris is pointing out that the unit tracker itself won't let you see if the unit is actually in the right spot. So when we're doing our checking process, we'll see if there's something weird. Let's say if originally it was named as 476, but on the update, they put a door here, and it really needs to be changed because this space stop at the bottom needs to be a different length next to the door. Then we'll see that there's something about this unit that makes it need to be renamed. We'll have that discussion before we do the release. That's the quality control that's now built into this process. The PCs will actually be assisting to make sure that each unit is verified in each spot. Does that answer your question, Chris? Does that seem to address what you're checking in with about not really being able to see the locations from the tracker? Yes, okay, perfect. Okay, we'll stay open for another minute in case somebody's typing up an additional group chat question. And again, when you go to the standard procedures, scroll over to engineering, and under the checking guideline SWIS, you can open the document. And the SWIS itself, the simplest SWIS ever, one step. A little misleading. You actually have to open this big document. But this again has the sessions. It's got the link. It's got the ID number. It's got the method for adding the key sheet to the session. It's got the steps on using the key sheets for a checking process. This is for the PCs. This is how we actually check the unit drawings horizontally, vertically, etc. Then it's got the using the key sheets to check by week, how we highlight the checked, how we check each instance, how you need the floor plans, etc. It's got the link if you need to add in the key sheet stamp when you're actually creating your first set. So, okay, it doesn't look like there's any additional questions at this time. If you're going through the process and you find something that you want to follow up on, you can always check in with me. You can send that question to me by email if you want as well, and then we can follow it up. The PCs have a PDCA scheduled for our checking Kaizen quarterly. So if there's anything that you see on here that's a typo and you're like, this is not quite right, we can always fix that and then address that the next time we do a PDCA on our Kaizen as well. So thank you everybody for sitting in on the training session. Keep in mind this is a new SWIS, so it's going to be important not only that we recognize that we have a new part of the process, but that we actually open up the SWIS and use the step-by-step instructions in order to make sure that we're using this carefully, because this is a very powerful quality control tool. So just make sure that we're actually using the SWIS, not just checking it off your box and say, oh, I went to a training session. Okay, again, thanks everyone for participating. Again, any questions, just send them my way. And I'll close this out.